There are kings who wear their crowns like armor, and then there are kings who wear them like nooses. Christian VII of Denmark
but I stand
was
down.
both. He was
Behold
15
the
years old
fortress.
when they placed
This
the
night is
kingdom
mine.
in his trembling hands. 15 when the weight of a dynasty pressed down on shoulders too narrow to carry it. 15 when the first whispers of madness began to crack the porcelain surface of his carefully constructed royal facade. This is not a story about palaces draped in velvet and gold. This is a story about what happens when the mind of a monarch fractures, when love becomes a battlefield more brutal than any war, and when a crown transforms into a curse that devours everything it touches. This is the story of a king who believed that violence could cure insanity, that conquest could win back affection, that bloodshed could prove what tenderness never could. And this is the story of a queen who learned too late that survival in a gilded cage sometimes requires becoming the very thing you fear. Picture him now, not seated on a throne, not draped in ceremonial robes, but pacing. Always pacing. Christian VII moved through his kingdom like a ghost haunting his own life. He walked the
Soldiers, the enemy is near. Sharpen your steel and hold the line. No man falters tonight. To your part.
The hour is late. We march at dawn. Searching for something
Understood, sir. The
he
men
could
are ready.
never name.
Good.
He
See
rode
to the final
through
prep.
military encampments unannounced, questioning soldiers about tactics, about courage, about what it felt like to kill a man and know you'd survived. He was beautiful in the way damaged things often are. Dark eyes that seemed to see too much and nothing at all. A smile that could charm ambassadors one moment and curdle into paranoid rage the next. His tutors had beaten knowledge into him. His father had beaten obedience. But no one had taught him how to silence the screaming in his own skull. By 17, he was king. By 18, he was married. By 19, he was lost. The voices started subtly. Whispers at the edge of consciousness suggesting that his advisors were plotting against him, that his food was poisoned, that the walls themselves were conspiring to crush him in his sleep. He would strike himself, hard enough to bruise, convinced that physical pain could drown out the chaos inside his mind. His physicians prescribed cold baths and bloodletting. His ministers prescribed duty and decorum. Christian prescribed himself something far more dangerous, the fantasy that he could become someone else entirely. Not a mad king, a warrior king, not a broken boy playing at sovereignty, but a conqueror whose violence would be remembered long after his madness was forgotten. Caroline Matilda arrived in Denmark like a lamb brought to slaughter, though no one told her that was her role. She was 15, just 15, a British princess with her brother's eyes and her mother's warning still ringing in her ears. You must secure the alliance. You must produce an heir. You must survive. She stepped off the ship onto Danish soil in November 1766, the wind tearing at her wedding dress, the cold biting through silk that had been chosen for beauty, not warmth. When she first saw her husband, she smiled. It was the last genuine smile she would offer him for a very long time. Christian looked at her the way one might look at a stranger who'd been assigned to share your prison cell. Not with hatred, not even with interest, with the dull, glazed recognition that this was simply another obligation, another performance, another piece of the elaborate theater that constituted royal life. Their wedding night was a disaster whispered about in every court from Copenhagen to Versailles. He was rough. She was terrified. Neither knew how to bridge the chasm between duty and desire, between what was expected and what was possible. Within weeks, she understood the truth. She had not married a man. She had married a title attached to a body that housed something fractured and unreachable. Christian disappeared for days at a time. He surrounded himself with advisors who encouraged his worst impulses, men who understood that a weak king was a profitable king. He visited brothels and boasted about it at council meetings. He mocked Caroline in front of foreign dignitaries, called her frigid, called her useless, called her everything except what she was, a girl trying desperately not to drown. She retreated into herself. She read. She rode her horses through the Danish countryside with a violence that terrified her ladies-in-waiting. She learned to make her face a mask, her heart a fortress, her entire existence a carefully choreographed performance of a contentment she did not feel. And she waited. For what? She didn't know. Change, perhaps. Escape. Death. Anything but this eternal, suffocating present. Christian's madness evolved. At first, it was paranoia. Then it was violence against himself. Then it became something stranger, more grandiose, more dangerous. He began to believe that he was not meant to be a ceremonial king, signing documents and attending balls. He was meant to be a warrior, a conqueror, a leader who would write his name in history not with ink, but with blood. He spent hours in the war rooms, studying maps of territories that didn't belong to Denmark, imagining campaigns against enemies both real and imagined. He demanded that his generals train him personally, that he learn to shoot, to fence, to command troops as though Denmark were about to be invaded at any moment. His advisors indulged him at first. Anything to keep him occupied, to channel his manic energy into something that didn't involve destroying diplomatic relationships or assaulting servants. But Christian's obsession deepened. He began speaking of war not as a political tool, but as a cure, a purification, a way to burn the madness out of his body and replace it with glory. A king who has never seen battle is not a king, he announced at a state dinner, his voice rising to a shout. He is a puppet, a decoration. I will not be remembered as the mad king of Denmark. I will be remembered as the king who conquered. The question no one dared ask. Conquered what? Denmark was not under threat. There was no war to fight, no invasion to repel. But Christian didn't need
the enemy is here.
War.
We must act now. Move the reserves to the left flank immediately.
Yes, sir. He needed to believe that somewhere out there, violence waited to transform him into something worthy. He rode out to military camps along the coast, demanding to sleep in soldiers' tents, to eat their food, to drill with them until his hands bled. He stood on windswept cliffs overlooking the sea and screamed challenges at invisible enemies. His entourage followed at a distance, watching their king unravel in real time, powerless to stop it. And through it all, one thought consumed him. If he could prove himself a warrior, if he could return victorious from some great campaign, Caroline would finally look at him with something other than fear and pity. She would love him. She would have to. Love, he believed, could be won the same way kingdoms were. Through force, through conquest, through the simple, brutal logic of dominance. Johann Friedrich Struensee arrived in Denmark in 1768, and everything changed. He was a German physician with radical ideas about governance, about the nature of power itself. He was handsome in a way that made women forget to breathe and men forget to trust him. He spoke 5 languages and believed that reason, not tradition, should govern human affairs. Christian met him during one of his episodes, a particularly violent bout of paranoia that left the king convinced his own guards were trying to suffocate him. Struensee talked him down, not with platitudes or prayers, but with calm, rational conversation. He treated Christian not as a king to be feared or a madman to be managed, but as a human being in pain who deserved compassion. For Christian, this was revolutionary. Someone saw him, actually saw him. Not the crown, not the title, not the symbol, but the suffering boy underneath. He made Struensee his personal physician, then his advisor, then something closer to a friend, though Christian's fractured psyche couldn't quite comprehend what friendship meant. Struensee moved through the Danish court like a fever. He instituted reforms, abolished torture, championed freedom of the press. He whispered in the king's ear, and the king obeyed, signing decree after decree, sometimes without even reading them. The old guard watched in horror as this foreign doctor accumulated power that should have been theirs. And Caroline noticed him too. At first, she was simply grateful. Struensee's influence meant Christian was calmer, less violent, more manageable. The king's obsession with military glory faded somewhat, replaced by a manic enthusiasm for reform. It wasn't stability, but it was closer than they'd ever come. But gratitude has a way of transforming into something more dangerous when you're young and trapped and desperate for any kind of genuine human connection. Struensee began to seek her out. Conversations in the garden. Consultations about the king's health. Meetings that lasted longer than they should, that felt charged with something neither of them wanted to name. Caroline told herself it meant nothing. She was the queen. He was an advisor. They were simply two intelligent people finding solace
My dearest,
in
this moment is more beautiful
She was
than any
lying to
dream.
herself.
With you, every
and
moment is a dream
somewhere
come true.
deep down,
I love you.
she knew it. It began the way these things always begin, with small betrayals that felt like survival. A touch of hands that lasted a moment too long. A look across a crowded room that communicated what words could not. The slow, terrifying realization that what you feel for someone could destroy everything you've built, and the even more terrifying realization that you no longer care. Caroline Matilda fell in love with Johann Struensee, and it was the most dangerous thing she had ever done. They were careful at first. Meetings disguised as discussions about the king's health. Letters that could be explained as correspondence about policy. But caution erodes under the weight of longing, and eventually they stopped pretending. He came to her chambers. She went to his. They moved through the palace like criminals, which in every way that mattered, they were. Adultery was treason when the woman was a queen. The punishment was death, exile, or something worse. Public humiliation so completely destroyed not just your life but your memory. But in those stolen moments, none of that mattered. With Struensee, Caroline could breathe. She could laugh. She could be something other than a political pawn or a breeding vessel or a decoration for state occasions. She could be herself, whoever that was, whoever she might have been if she'd been born into any other life. And Struensee loved her. Not as a queen, not as a trophy, but as a woman, complicated, fierce, vulnerable, trapped. He loved her desperately, stupidly, in a way that made him reckless. They grew bold, too bold. Struensee's enemies at court began to notice. The way the queen smiled at him, the way she defended his policies, the way her children looked nothing like the king. Because they were children now. Caroline had given birth to a son, an heir, fulfilling her primary duty as queen. And then, later, a daughter. A daughter with Struensee's eyes, though no one said it aloud. Christian knew. On some level, he had to know. But his mind was so fractured by then, so consumed by his delusions of military glory and his desperate need for validation, that he couldn't quite grasp the betrayal happening in his own household. Or perhaps he simply didn't care. Perhaps by then, he'd stopped believing that love or loyalty or any of those fragile human bonds actually existed. He retreated further into his fantasies. He planned campaigns that would never happen. He studied battle strategies for wars that existed only in his deteriorating mind. He paced the castle battlements at night, shouting orders at invisible armies. And while he descended into madness, his wife and his closest advisor built a life in the shadows of his crown. Power abhors a vacuum, and Christian VII had become one. The old aristocracy watched Struensee accumulate influence and felt their own slipping away. He was a commoner, a foreigner, a man who dared to suggest that birth didn't guarantee the right to rule.
I expect unwavering loyalty from every soul in this hall. Let there be no doubt, duty is our highest
It
calling.
started with whispers, rumors about the queen and the doctor, their relationship, their influence over the king. Then the whispers became accusations. Then the accusations became evidence. Letters intercepted, servants bribed, moments observed and recorded. The queen mother, Julie Marie, led the conspiracy. She'd waited in the shadows for years, watching her stepson's madness, biding her time. Now she saw her opportunity. If Christian could be proven incompetent, if the queen could be disgraced, if Struensee could be removed, her own son could take the throne. On the night of January 16th, 1772, they struck. Christian was roused from his bed, confused and terrified, surrounded by men in military uniforms who spoke to him in stern voices about treason and duty and signing papers he didn't understand. In his paranoid, fractured state, he obeyed. He always obeyed when frightened enough.
You'll have to kill me
He signed
first.
the order for
That can be
Struensee's
arranged.
arrest. He signed
Explain
the order
this
for
document
Caroline's
now.
confinement.
I know nothing
He signed
of
away
it.
the only
Lies,
two
you will
people in
answer.
Denmark who treated him like a human being. Struensee was dragged from his chambers and thrown into prison. Caroline was confined to Kronborg Castle, the same fortress where she'd once walked the ramparts dreaming of escape. Now she was a prisoner, accused of adultery, treason, and destroying the sanctity of the Danish crown. The trial was a spectacle designed to humiliate. Struensee was interrogated, tortured, forced to confess to crimes both real and imagined. He admitted to the affair. He admitted to everything they wanted him to admit to, because by then, broken and bleeding, he had nothing left to protect except Caroline's dignity. But they took that too. Caroline was forced to sign a confession, forced to admit her adultery, forced to relinquish her title, her children, her entire life. In exchange, they promised her survival. They promised that if she cooperated, they would exile her rather
Unhand me!
than
I demand
execute
you
her.
release me!
She signed.
Quiet! You
What
are coming
choice
with
did
us.
she have?
No! Let
On
go!
April
Move!
28th, 1772, Johann Friedrich Struensee was executed in Copenhagen. They didn't just kill him, they destroyed him. It was a public execution designed to erase not just his life, but his legacy, to send a message to anyone who dared challenge the established order. He was broken on the wheel, each limb shattered methodically while crowds watched. Then he was beheaded. Then his body was quartered, the pieces displayed throughout the city as a warning. Caroline wasn't allowed to attend. She was already in exile by then, shipped back to Celle in Germany, forbidden from ever seeing her children again, forbidden from using her title, forbidden from being remembered as anything but a cautionary tale about the price of royal transgression. She wrote letters to Christian, begging him to intervene, to show mercy, to remember that she had been his wife, the mother of his children. He never responded. Perhaps he never even read them. By then, his madness had consumed him so completely that the past was just another battlefield in his mind, littered with casualties he could no longer name. Christian lived for another 36 years, a ghost haunting his own throne. He signed documents placed before him. He attended ceremonies. He moved through the motions of kingship, while the real power was exercised by regents and ministers, and everyone except the man wearing the crown. He never recovered. He never would. The madness that had promised to make him a conqueror had instead made him a prisoner, locked inside a mind that no longer distinguished between reality and delusion, between memory and hallucination, between love and betrayal. Caroline Matilda died in Celle on May 10th, 1775. She was 23 years old. The official cause was scarlet fever, but those who knew her suspected something else. A broken heart, perhaps, or simply the slow death that comes from losing everything. Your children, your dignity, your future, your reason to wake up each morning. She was buried quietly, without ceremony, in a place far from the kingdom she'd briefly ruled. Her daughter, the child who bore Struensee's features, grew up never knowing her mother. Her son, the heir she'd produced to secure the alliance, grew up to be King Frederick VI, a competent ruler who spent his life trying to undo the damage his father's madness had caused. Christian VII died in 1808, having reigned for 42 years and governed for none of them. History would remember him as the Mad King, the puppet, the cautionary tale about what happens when mental illness wears a crown. But this story isn't really about Christian. Not entirely. It's about what royalty does to human beings, how it magnifies weakness, weaponizes love, transforms survival into betrayal. It's about how a crown can promise protection and deliver only suffocation, how duty can feel like death, how the same golden cage that elevates you above ordinary life also imprisons you so completely that even genuine feeling becomes treason. Caroline Matilda wanted to be loved. Christian wanted to be whole. Struensee wanted to change the world. None of them got what they wanted. Instead, they got history, that cold, unforgiving judge that reduces human complexity to simple narrative, that turns tragedy into entertainment, that makes cautionary tales out of people who were just trying to survive impossible circumstances. We remember them now across centuries. These three people caught in a catastrophe of crowns and madness and forbidden love. We remember the scandal, the execution, the exile. We remember the madness. But do we remember the truth? That beneath the titles and the treason trials, they were just people. Flawed, desperate, human people trying to find connection in a world designed to isolate them. Trying to feel something real in a life built entirely on performance. Christian pacing battlements at dawn, searching for a war that could save him. Caroline reading in her chambers, dreaming of a life that could have been hers. Struensee believing that reason and compassion could triumph over tradition and fear. All of them wrong. All of them doomed. All of them ours to judge from the comfortable distance of centuries. This was the madness of love and crown. Not the grand madness of kings conquering nations, but the quiet madness of souls destroying each other in pursuit of something. Anything that felt true. And in the end, the crown won. It always does. The crown survived Christian's insanity. It survived Caroline's exile. It survived Struensee's execution. It survived because crowns are made of metal, and metal doesn't feel pain, doesn't know regret, doesn't die of broken hearts in foreign castles far from home. People die. Love dies. Sanity dies. But the crown endures. And somewhere in Denmark, in a palace built on the bones of forgotten stories, a throne sits empty, waiting for the next flawed human to believe that wearing it might make them whole.